Hello and welcome. In today's video I'm going to talk about the trial of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, and in this video only thing you're going to see is me. I'm not going to be putting anything else up because that is what YouTube now wants. It doesn't want any photographs or newsreels or anything like that. It wants to see the creator. This is what it claims is its way of deciding what's AI slop and what isn't. So to return to Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, he was tried by a British military tribunal in Hamburg in 1949. The court approached his case through a framework that was already beginning to age even then. The trial was structured around the traditional laws of war, questions of command, responsibility, unlawful orders, reprisals, and the treatment of prisoners of war and civilians. The central legal issue was not whether the crimes had occurred in Manstein's areas of command, and that was uncontested, but whether he had ordered them, knowingly permitted them, or failed in his duty to prevent or punish them. In that sense, the trial treated Manstein as a professional soldier whose conduct had to be measured against established military norms. And it's, in my opinion, what he was guilty of is this: he failed in his duty to prevent them, to investigate the crimes, and to punish the crimes. He knew that these crimes were taking place, but he told others not to get involved. Now, when the court was in session, what it didn't possess was a conceptual framework that understood the Eastern Front itself as a fundamentally different type of war. Ideological directives, racial policy, and genocidal violence were acknowledged, but often treated as a contextual background rather than as operational drivers embedded within military command structures. Orders that framed the campaign against the Soviet Union as an ideological and racial struggle were not consistently analysed as shaping the behaviour of armies in the field. Cooperation between the Wehrmacht and SS units was addressed indirectly and just from time to time, rather than as a systematic feature of occupation and security policy. Above all, so-called anti-partisan warfare was treated largely as a conventional security problem rather than as a mechanism through which genocide and mass violence were frequently enacted. The narrowing of perspectives mattered. It allowed the trial to focus on what could be proven in a courtroom according to mid-20th century legal standards, while leaving larger questions about the nature of the war largely unexamined. Crimes were framed as excesses, failures of supervision, or deviations from otherwise legitimate military conduct. The possibility that the German army was itself an integral instrument of a war of annihilation, rather than a neutral force occasionally contaminated by Nazi policy, remained only partially articulated. In the decades since then, since this trial, this interpretive landscape has changed profoundly. From the late 20th century onwards, historians increasingly rejected the idea of a clean separation between professional soldiering and ideological violence on the Eastern Front. The campaign against the Soviet Union came to be understood as a war of annihilation in which military operations, racial policy, and mass murder were inseparably linked. Indeed, Hitler said this in 1941, but nobody apparently took him seriously. Within this framework, the Wehrmacht was no longer seen merely as operating alongside genocidal institutions. It itself was actively enabling and sustaining them. Ideology, propaganda, and material conditions combined to brutalize German soldiers and commanders alike, eroding traditional restraints and normalizing extreme violence. In this view, atrocities were not aberrations, but the logical outcome of a campaign defined from the very onset by racial and political objectives. the distinction between military necessity and ideological violence, so often invoked in post-war defences, was really untenable, or at least becoming untenable. At the level of command and structure, genocidal policy was embedded within the operational history of the war. Decisions taken by senior commanders, including the allocation of forces and resources, the acceptance of ideological orders, and the treatment of the civilian population, created conditions in which mass murder could proceed efficiently and repeatedly. Responsibility was no longer confined to explicit kill orders, but extended to the broader system of command that made such violence possible and routine. Equally important was the reassessment of anti-partisan warfare. So-called security operations were rarely neutral responses to guerrilla threats. Instead, they were often ideologically charged campaigns in which Jews, suspected partisans, and anybody could be suspect, and civilians were deliberately conflated. Violence against these groups was not merely tolerated, but encouraged, justified through a language that blurred racial extermination and military necessity. And it must be reinforced that many of the partisans were only partisans because of this policy in the first place. If this policy hadn't have existed, then many of the partisans wouldn't have been partisans. Indeed, we can see this from the very first Einsatzgruppen reports, that the word partisan is used when there clearly wasn't any partisan or bandit, depending on the language that what was deemed appropriate. Viewed through this historiographical lens, the Manstein trial, I would argue, appears both significant and deeply limited. It was significant because it represented one of the few attempts by a Western court to hold a senior Wehrmacht commander accountable for crimes committed in Eastern Europe. Yet it was really limited because it operated within a legal and political framework that couldn't fully confront the nature of the war in which those crimes occurred. Indeed, I don't think it even understood the war in which they occurred. Cold War considerations, concern for German public opinion, the lingering respect for military professionals, all of these together, they shaped the boundaries of what could be prosecuted and how responsibility was to be, could be articulated. Modern, today, I would say people wouldn't render the Hamburg verdict meaningless, but I think we now understand its constraints. Where the tribunal judged Manstein as an individual commander who may or may not have failed at specific duties, but now we can put him in a system that fused military command with genocidal policy. The shift here is really profound because it's not asking any longer whether Manstein knew enough or ordered enough, but it's asking how his very commands function within a war whose very logic was annihilation. In this sense, the trial, it's a historic artifact of its time. It's legally careful, politically cautious, and morally partial. The subsequent evolution of what we know has not so much overturned the trial as has surpassed it, revealing a deeper and more troubling picture of the Wehrmacht's role in Nazi crimes and challenging the long-standing narratives that once allowed figures like Manstein to be remembered partially as soldiers rather than as participants in one of the most destructive campaigns in modern history. And I know this is quite difficult for many of us to accept, but for me as a person very much interested in strategy and tactics, Manstein is the number one person. He is the most brilliant person in history as far as this is concerned. There are three battles above all. We've got the attack on France in 1940. We've got Winter Storm, even though that was a failure, the attempt to relieve Stalingrad. It mightn't have been a failure if Hitler hadn't put the constraints that he'd put on the garrison within Stalingrad itself. And we've got the third battle, which I think is possibly the most brilliant strategic victory of all time. That is, I'm going to exaggerate a bit there, but one of the most brilliant victory is in the circumstances. It is the attack which recaptured Kharkiv, Izium and Belgorod, in February and March of 1943. It's in the circumstances, the situation that existed on the Eastern Front then, from the massive defeat at Stalingrad, which was absolutely catastrophic for the Hitler regime. Then only a few weeks later, with resources which were really very, very small in the circumstances, to pull off a victory, which actually then, from having a war which was very much in the Soviets' favour, to at the beginning of 1943, within 2 months, it turned the situation completely around. So now it was in a draw situation. And had Hitler not decided to do the ridiculous attack on Kursk, then perhaps it would have been sufficient to have maintained, maybe on that front. Of course, there was the Western Allies, there was the bombing campaign, but he might have been able to hold off the Soviets for longer had these resources been given to someone like Manstein to actually hold the Eastern Front. Anyway, so but that's from an intellectual point of view. It is at the same time, we mustn't forget that Manstein did allow these things, the Einsatzgruppen, to act behind his lines, and he knew about it. And the question would become, well, what could he have done about it? Well, he could have refused to have served the regime, and that would have come without consequences for himself. All it would have meant was his career would have, he'd had to go into retirement. But that's it, on a full pension, and with keeping all the money that Hitler had given him up until that date. That, I think, is the thing that we should really consider. Thanks for watching. Hope you found it interesting. I upload every day at 2000 hours my time, and most days I do a short video. But on Tuesday and Fridays I do longer videos, such as this one you're seeing right now. I don't really like to appear in front of the screen myself. I'd much rather do a video where I'm putting in bits of newsreel and photographs and my films from my visits to these places, which would have been perfectly possible in this case. But this is what YouTube now wants. It says you've got to appear in front of the screen yourself to show a bit of authority and to act as though you know what you're talking about. So that's what I'm doing right here. I also have a channel membership. Now, I have a number of problems with YouTube. I've had videos taken down. I've had them censored for absolutely no reason whatsoever. They've accused my videos, which obviously relate to the Second World War, of encouraging hatred and the like. At the same time, incidentally, allow things on AI slop to do what I would say dehumanizing avatars of women, which anyway, that's my opinion. That's YouTube, that's its policies. I can't beat it. Now, if this continues, I will of course have to rethink what my policy will be towards YouTube, if any videos at all will be allowed outside of the membership. This now depends utterly on how YouTube behaves. Now, for the moment, so I would encourage you to take membership, £5, €6 or $6 per month. Anyway, for the moment, thanks for watching. All the best. Bye for now.